Alright, so we're live, and I'm sitting here with Markus Kruger.
Hi, everyone.
And this is episode number 34, shot on the 1st of February 2020. And Markus is a physicist.
Yes.
Can we say which school you're working at?
At the moment, I'm working at the Academy Hout Bay, in Hout Bay. I'm physics teacher and computer science teacher there. My training was done at Stellenbosch University, physics department. And yeah, I've worked all over the place. Physics teacher, math teacher, chemistry teacher for a little while.
So you have a bit of Walter White in you.
I don't particularly like teaching chemistry,
okay.
But it's something that I can do if I need to.
Between chemistry, physics, and mathematics, do you have a preference between those three?
I love mathematics for all the avenues that it can take you, because you're not constrained by reality. You're literally looking at, if this is true, where does it lead you? With physics, you're more constrained. It's the physical world. So you look at what happens when I toggle this little bit. Where does it change? Is there a relationship? Can I use that relationship? But yeah, they're both fascinating. I mean, and there's lots of things in mathematics where you find the mathematics first, and then later when you see the physics, it reminds you of the mathematics that you saw. So it becomes useful because you already have the mathematics running.
And can you be a physicist with poor mathematical background, with a poor mathematical background?
You can start there, but in doing physics, your mathematical background will improve. There is just too much application of maths in there for it not to. If it doesn't, you will not end up being a physicist.
And this desire for the truth, where does that come from?
I think it's not really linked so much to academics. It's more linked to having made bad decisions on bad information. And so lessons learned means get the information and get the right information. There's an opening sequence in, I've got to remember, The Big Short.
Just hold that, because I love The Big Short, but this cat of mine is going to irritate me. This is the second time in 2 podcasts. Kom weg hier zo, alsjeblieft. Kom.
Ours does the same thing when you give him food. Quite capable of jumping up and eating, but then, sits there mowing at us. Please, I'm unable to jump. Help me.
I don't know. Let's see how they treat you during this podcast. So, Big Short, who's Christian Bale?
Yeah, but before that, right in the opening sequence, they talk about people have the wrong idea. They think that the decisions they make on something that is unknown is the stuff that really gets them. And those decisions are not the real culprits. The real damage is done by the thing that you really think you know for sure that isn't true. So the strong drive that you have for evidence that happens not to be true. And when you make decisions on that, they really bite you in the ass. So it's making sure that the thing that you know is actually true. And that's pretty much what physics is. It's actually what science is all about, is making sure that the claim that you're making is substantiated by the evidence to as high a degree as you can possibly have. Or, in for publication, to a commonly accepted degree of accuracy.
So the Big Short, the assumption was that the money,
housing market was
where they're putting their money is safe and it's going to give you a return and everything's fine. That was the assumption, and that put them in the arse. And then the pursuit of, let's see what's actually going on. That is, and we don't know what's happening there, which Christian Bale pursued. That's where the real answers came.
And there's a lot of lessons in there. Where there's at one point where Christian Bale's investor speaks to
Sorry,
him.
I'm going to interrupt you. And the lesson is that people that listen to heavy metal are awesome.
I'm not sure that there's enough substantiating evidence for that. So his investor comes to him and he talks about the housing market is going to fail. And the guy says, but how do you know that? He says, you just look at the data, at the stuff that's in the tranches?
Yeah.
And he says, but there are thousands of things in there. Nobody looks at them. Not even the lawyers that set them up. And he goes, but I did. And that's the thing. It's a big amount of work, and because it's a lot of work, people stop looking and just make assumptions. No, it's great. Assumptions get made all the time. But you can't leave an assumption by itself. An assumption is not evidence. You have to then take that assumption and do tests. See if the assumption you make actually is in line with reality. In the end, that is the only true test. If you have the most beautiful theory in the world and it doesn't agree with reality, it doesn't mean a thing.
So, two things that come up is so proving something and disproving something, you should be equally as happy because you've accomplished something. You've
pushed back uncertainty. And that, in science, that's actually what we're trying to do. We start with everything being possible, and then by a process of elimination, you figure out what is not possible. So if you think about everything that's possible as kind of this door over there. So we start chipping away at little parts of it. And we say, okay, we know how this works. And because we know how this works, we know that these things are not possible. So you cut away and you cut away and you cut away. And at the moment, we've cut away a large part of that door. We know that the stuff that works is in a small area. It doesn't mean that everything in that area works. It just means that we know for a fact that everything outside it doesn't. And now we're working inside that little area. We're chipping away, seeing what works, and that's how science gets done.
And then something that I read the other day is some lady won the Nobel Peace Prize, and then she had to withdraw one of her studies because they couldn't replicate the study. I don't know if you read up about, or you read about that one.
Replication science, and this is something that me and Astrid, that was also on the podcast.
Yeah, so Astrid, I think she's number 11. People that want to check that out. Astrid grew up in communist Romania under the severity of the arsehole that ruled there. And basically we talked about her life story of how she grew up, and but anyway, so go check it out. Fascinating to listen to how she grew up and how strong she is as a human. Really interesting.
We disagree about replication studies.
Okay.
Because she doesn't really value them. At least she doesn't value them nearly as much as I do.
Okay.
and she's much more practical in her scientific approach. So for her, working in the field that she does, the practical results that you can use in industry is kind of paramount.
She's in viticulture, so she makes wine.
She analyzes wine.
Okay.
So she does the chemistry that can tell you how to link what's in wine to how you perceive wine. So taste, smell, how long it lasts, how long it takes to mature, all of those kind of things. And even a little further, not just the wine, but the grapes as well. So how do you link the stuff that's in a grape through different treatments of the vines? How does that link to the taste of wine? Can you link it? Is there something that you can always do to get this? Or this taste in wine nobody likes. So is there something we can do to consistently remove it from the wine that we make? So she does the chemical analysis and then the data analysis for that. But to get back to the replication studies, so she does a lot of method development. So to figure out how much of this substance is in here, we follow this method. So it goes preparation of the grapes or the juice or the wine. Then we do this treatment, then we do this treatment, then we put it in this machine for analysis, and then we analyze the data in this way. And once it's done, she does enough of those things to say, this is the method that you can follow. If you follow this method, this is what you have. Okay. And she's very good at doing that. And she publishes prodigiously on that. My problem with that is that I believe very strongly in a slower scientific method, where if you claim something, you do the experiments, you publish the results, but then those results have to be supported by independent experiments. So she will produce a method, but that method should not be accepted in the scientific community until at least 2 or 3 independent groups have done that experiment and shown to get the same results. Okay?
It's almost like it's like your peer review on an experiment.
Everything that she publishes goes through peer review as well.
Yeah.
But those peer reviewers do not replicate the experimental results.
Yeah, so it's a peer review for the experiment, not the publication of the article. So the peer review is like checking out the article and everyone confirms it, but then someone needs to go further and do the actual experiment.
And the peer review is done by people. So you have to look at it this way. The thing that you are publishing is new. So you will be peer reviewed by people in that field, okay, that understand the principles on which you base the theory. But they can't possibly verify what you're doing 100% because it's new work that you've just done. If it's not new work, you're not publishing it.
Yeah.
Okay? You can be fairly sure that your peers in that environment understand what's going on, and they have a good chance of catching something that you're doing that's completely wrong. But if it's a subtle mistake, there's a chance that they might miss it, especially if it's in the part that is new. Now you need replication, and replication is actually done depending on how important the result is often done by master students. So a student that is doing something to show that they've mastered the field, but not necessarily doing new independent research. The problem with that is that journals are not really inclined to publish replication studies because it's not new, it's not sexy.
Oh, yeah.
The big problem is that it is, in my view, absolutely fundamentally needed. There are many results, and if you search, you will find many studies showing that results that were accepted has been proven to not be correct. There's a very good video by Veritasium as well, where he shows how that comes about without any malice, without any intent to deceive. It's purely a function of the underlying mathematics of doing experiments, finding results, and verifying results. So we slightly disagree on that.
I feel it's almost like you can update the phrase like if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, did it really fall? And it's like if an experiment couldn't be proven, did it really happen? Like if you couldn't replicate it, is it really true?
Yeah, the thing is just we need to adjust the amount of what's the right word? Value that we couple to that result. So yes, by all means, when the result comes out, it's been peer reviewed, you can get excited about it. It is new science. That's what we do. We look at something and go, I never knew that. I didn't know it worked like that. And you feel excitement because you've learned something new. But it has to go further into, okay, so how am I going to check this? How am I going to verify it? One of the consequences of our current way of funding being allocated. So I have to step back a little bit. There's really two ways that research can be done. One of it is iterative improvement or targeted, and one of them is blue sky research. And we touched a little bit on that the last time we spoke. So funding for blue sky research is virtually non-existent at the moment. Whenever you apply for funding, you have to be able to show or motivate at least how the research you are going to do is going to impact the economy, society, or some target that is of value to the funder. And I understand that because funding comes from industry, and industry wants to make money. So they want a guarantee that what you're going to do is going to benefit them. The problem with that is that the greatest advances to humankind does not come from iterative improvement. It doesn't come from targeted research. It comes from blue sky research. It comes from the new discovery of something that nobody had ever thought about, that there isn't already a supporting industry for. Example of that, when Thomson worked on the electron, identified the properties. When Millikan measured the charge on an electron, it wasn't done because they wanted to make a machine with it. It was done for the discovery of it. We would not have any of this without that. We wouldn't have computers. We wouldn't have sound recording equipment. I mean, your microphones work with a piezoelectric capacitor. Okay? It changes, it creates a voltage because it moves relative. And the charge distribution on that, because it moves, changes the capacitance, and that can be read and send signals to your laptop.
And who funded them? Or they just had a pursuit for knowledge? Or
so Millikan, I'm not sure. Millikan was working at a university. I'm assuming Thomson was as well. At that stage, to become a scientist, you mostly had to be from a wealthy family that could support you in the endeavor.
Okay. And then the opposite would be an artist who was really poor, and then they die and became famous.
And a lot of science, the results of the science, the impact of it only becomes apparent after that person's death. We did electronics before the 1950s, okay? But only once capacitors, once transistors became a reality, once quantum theory was linked up with physical manufacturing capability, only then did we start getting advances in computing power. Before then, computers of any real life power was house size, building size. To get them smaller, you needed to make the decision making part of them smaller and use less power.
So what you said earlier, it's there's a lot in the way we live as humans that I find very I'm not going to find a sophisticated word for it. I just find the way we live quite dumb, in the way that it defeats the purpose, or it's like it's counterintuitive. It's like the way that websites publish articles that are not peer reviewed. So there's a lot of bullshit information flowing around. And I'm quite happy with the bullshit information because I know how to figure out if it's legitimate or not. For example, there's due to my type of background and some of our mutual friends, the idea of alcoholics and drug addicts, I find that discussion quite interesting. And there's a lot of experimental research being done on the impact that hallucinogenics have on depression and the desire to use alcohol and all of that. And The Guardian published an article, and I'm lucky that I have some fucking great, not neuroscientists, but like some very clever psychiatrist in America. So I sent the article to him. So I'm like, so what's your take on this? He's like, it's not peer reviewed. You know, they're talking as if this is now going to be the new approach. And I feel for the average human out there that doesn't know this is how we take data in, and this is how we filter it. And then also, but why are you publishing stuff that's not even legitimate? Like, this is not really being proven, but we're writing about it everywhere. Isn't that frustrating for you to see sometimes?
My wife has this saying, let it go. All I can say is that there's a reason why she has that saying. Because I will go home some days and I will start talking at her about these things and the frustration that I feel because of something that I've read. And again, Veritasium did a very, very nice video on...
Just quickly, Veritasium is a YouTube channel that does a few cool things, so go check them out.
What he talks about is how familiarity with a certain concept or just words biases your ability to discern things. And the study was done, and he cites the study was done between two American universities. I can't remember the names, but nonsense words that were published in their the university newspapers, and then afterwards there was a questionnaire sent around where students were asked whether it was a good word or a bad word. So not what the meaning was, just whether it was good or bad. So it's both nonsense, but depending on how many times it was mentioned in the article, the word was either associated to be good or bad. So the more familiar you are with the word, the more likely you are to see it as something that's good. And that is exactly where the problem lies with the garbage that we get fed. Think of it as somebody walking on a beach with a metal detector. So they are looking for the coin or pendant or something like that. But there is orders of magnitude more sand. So if you didn't have that way of discerning where the metal is, you would have no hope whatsoever. And that is not something that we train at school. And that is something that I find incredibly worrying. We do not train students to be able to discern for themselves what is true and what is not. In fact, school setup does exactly the opposite. We tell ourselves because school has got lots of students and you're 40 students to a teacher, you have to enforce order. You have to get students to conform to the rules of the school, because if you don't have order, you won't be able to teach them anything. And those students, some of them rebel, but most of the students fall into that. They fit in with the perceived rules of society. And society for them is the school environment, because that's where they spend most of their time. Those students accept information without questioning it. And yes, I know there are good teachers that tell them you have to question. But when you tell them verbally you have to question, but the whole system is telling them you must accept, they're going to be programmed to accept.
And it's almost like someone said this, I don't know if it's real or not, but if you tie an elephant to a tree for a certain period of time as a baby, even later in life when you release it, it still thinks that it's stuck to the tree. Or I don't know if it was the elephant or another animal, but I feel like even if you're super capable, if you're conditioned for a certain duration, to break free from that is very difficult.
I haven't heard the elephant one, but there's an experiment that was done with I can't remember if it's monkeys or chimpanzees, but there was a ladder with bananas on top, and it was put in a room with a couple of, I don't know if it started out with a single. I think it started out with a single. And every time the chimpanzee tried to climb, it would be punished. I can't remember what the punishment was. I think it got wetted down or something like that. But anyway, so it was trained and conditioned that it shouldn't go up the ladder. Even though there's something good there, but it shouldn't. And then other monkeys were brought into the environment. New monkeys don't know about that. And no punishment was doled out, but the other chimpanzees, the ones that were in there, would punish and stop the new one, from going up there.
No way.
We're monkeys. We might think that we're smarter, and in some cases we are, but human nature, or the way our brains function and the psychology that underpins that, is very similar. If society tells you that something is right, to go against that is a very, very hard thing. And you're not going to get a large proportion of the population going against that.
But do you find that even, because I'm assuming that you should be having certain interactions with other qualified intellectual people.
And I do.
And even at higher level, is there still a conflict of how do we pursue the truth? Or should we do it, should we not? Or how do we get there? Consensus, how does
far
that come
less.
over? Okay.
The methods might differ, but the idea of uncovering and verification sticks. Because if you understand the mathematics of it, you understand that it is absolutely vital. It's not that it's the best way, it's the only way. And mathematically speaking, finding something that has an only solution is scarce. Most problems in mathematics have multiple solutions or no solutions, or even solutions that are not really a solution but the best you can do kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's inherently complex. But when it comes to gathering information, making decisions on bad information leads to bad decisions.
But it just, I find the military an interesting example with that statement, because I've listened to a few podcasts now where you have guys that, let's say, won the Medal of Honor But the only way they could have done that is by having a leader that made bad decisions to put them in a position to have won the Medal of Honor, and it's like, and it's sad when bad decisions are made in the military because people die. But I'm assuming that even all these power failures and water shortages, that's also influenced. There's a lot of bad decisions. There's a lot of bad decisions
being made.
And leaders aren't chosen, I feel, on merit, but on the personality, the influence, I spoke to the surfing, I spoke to Mick 2 episodes ago, who owns a surf school, and I said to him, there's etiquette when surfing. Whoever's closest to the inside should be given access to the wave, and the other. The problem is, people are rewarded for bad behavior, and whenever that is present, people are going to continue doing bad behavior, and that's the thing with leaders. Like, they are continually rewarded for bad behavior. It's like, fucking chop this guy's leg off, then we know. When you see this one, don't trust him, because he's going to make decisions good for himself and for a few people around him, but it's going to be bad for millions of others.
So, I mean, I don't know if I can get behind the chopping of legs, but a good example of that is traffic.
Yeah.
So you have, okay, I'm going to tie this into bad design as well, but let's just talk about, there are 2 lanes. Okay, one of them turns this way and one of them turns the other way. Okay, people are going home, most of them want to turn left. So what happens? A couple of people queue in the left lane, a couple of other people go into the right lane, go as far forward as they can, and then merge. So the average time for everyone to get home increases, but the average time for that single person decreases. Bad behavior gets rewarded. Everyone suffers. How do you stop that?
Policing.
You need, number one, you need to stop between those lanes. And I'm actually thinking of a very specific case. Between those lanes is a dashed line. It's perfectly legal for that person to do exactly that.
It's like when you come home from Cape Town and you have to, if you come towards the N2.
It's exactly that what I'm talking about.
It's like
Hospital Bend.
Yeah, there's these things that's up that you can't do that.
Oh, okay. That's exactly. So in Hospital Bend, if that was kind of put there,
yeah,
you have plenty of time to go into whichever lane you should be in. There is no reason for you to have access to the choice lanes after you enter that split.
Yeah.
But because you do, you get people who push in, and the whole journey takes longer for everyone.
So what's the other things that you can do to accomplish that people follow the system?
There's only 2 things you can do. Either you have to police it, so there has to be somebody there that stops that person from doing it, somebody with authority, or you have to make it impossible. So instead of having a solid line, which everyone ignores in Cape Town anyway, you have the pillars running through.
Because those pillars never used to be there. It's just after...
And the pillars work. They really do. So you make the pillar so that it doesn't do damage to the car, but it's covered in a paint that comes off. So you have nice little lines on the cars that go through them. Yeah.
It's just, it's crazy to see how people are... And this is where I'm going to link my discussion with the altruism and not, because... before I continue, listen, guys, if you like the podcast, please press... I always fuck this one. Please please press like on the video or press subscribe, share it if you want. I do it as a hobby, and it's cool if I get some sort of interaction. Feel free to comment. Maybe I should get Astrid to give a rebuttal. Astrid,
I'm seeing her after this. So
okay, Astrid, please write a little essay at the bottom of this video. So I sat with Markus, I think about 2 months ago.
Yeah, it was
2.5 months ago.
Somewhere in November.
And I was having quite a hard time in life at that point. I always have a hard time in life because I choose the difficult route, because I was I was indoctrinated as a little kid to be like a little Boy Scout, always go upstream, choose the difficult path. And in adulthood, it's fucking irritating because it's hard work. But anyway, something that was, I don't know where it came from. I assume it's from my parents. And I never knew I had this, which is called altruism, where given a situation where, am I going to take this or give this? A lot of times my natural instinct is to give. You know, if we walk in a desert and we find, me and my friend, and we find a bottle of water, I'll probably give him more water than what I'll take. And there is an element of being a people pleaser, but a lot of times it's like, you know what makes me happy is to make other people happy. It's a very weird thing. And I never knew that people were so selfish. And you highlighted the fact that go to Veritasium and go watch this little video.
Yeah, I think it's not Veritasium. That one was... now I've forgotten the name. It's the guy that does the claymation. The Python animation.
I'll find it on my phone in a second. And you pointed out that not everyone has that. And that system only works if you work in a system where everyone has that. And this little video showed it. And I realized that a lot of my troubles in life is the fact that I've worked from the angle that I am equal and similar to everyone around me. And I've never calculated the fact that people will consciously if people made a bad decision, it's like, well, they didn't do it on purpose, I can't blame them. And it's like, no, there are some fuckers out there that make bad decisions knowing that it will be at your detriment. And not only do they do that, they're proud. They will go boast to their friends about how much money they made based on this bad decision. And then they will get praised for what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, look, sales kind of depend on that. And if you're a good salesman, you have to take advantage of the other person's lack of knowledge about something. You're going to drive it.
Yeah, I'm not a good salesman because I always have to sell something based on, listen, do you have a desire or a need for this? No? Okay, well, listen, we shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, that's not. You're not going to be employed as a salesperson by a lot of companies.
And I don't even try to do it. But anyway, I don't know how we got to this topic, but it's talking about the traffic and everything. It's just crazy for me to see how people are willing to make decisions that will influence people around them negatively. It's like your decision influences, let's say, 100 people negatively. Mm-hmm. You're willing to do that, rather than you maybe also just being one of us. I don't know.
The interesting thing about the video, that specific video on altruism, is that you see that when you have a purely selfish population, it reaches a certain equilibrium. If you have a purely altruistic, you reach a certain maximum population. But if you have one that's split 50-50, the maximum population that's supported is actually higher than either of those two methods separately. So it tells you that there's merit in a society where both of them exist for the society. So now you have to kind of look outside of the individuals. Individuals are not the important part that you're looking at. You're looking at the organism that is the whole population, and you can see that the organism that's the whole population is bigger when both of those properties exist in the constituents. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. So you would expect that to happen in society because that's how evolution works. It evolves towards the thing that is most efficient.
Mm-mm-mm.
And it is. Therefore, it's... assholes are a consequence of evolution in both cases.
But it's like, if for me, the ultimate arsehole is a taxi driver. However, a lot of what they do, I agree with. Because if you went to, I think most European cities, I haven't been to many, but if you look at buses in London, they a lot of time have designated lanes so that they can be faster than the average citizen that is in a car. There are certain routes and preference that they are given. And a lot of what the taxis do, for example, driving in the yellow lane, in overseas there would be a lane built for them, so that they can be doing it. Because I understand also from a business point of view, you got to do it. But also just from an economical point of view, we got to get everyone to work. And if they had to join traffic and they are transporting, let's say, 20 individuals, where one car is transporting one individual. So I understand that. It's just, again, it's like affirmative action. I had to do this so many times at university. I do agree with it, the importance of affirmative action and the impact that it can have. But then we start talking about the implementation of the policy. And I think it's that's the thing with the taxis, is that if the government can just come out and say, listen, taxis have access to the left lane, to the yellow line, but they're not allowed to drive faster than 30 kilometers an hour. For example, at 40, 50, 60, that becomes dangerous. But I think at 30, fair enough. Sometimes at traffic lights, they are allowed to do something or whatever. Stopping. Why are they just stopping everywhere? Because they don't have designated stop zones. If you're on a London bus, every 100 or 2 or 3, 400 meters, there is a little stop.
Yep.
And so why do we not have the same for our taxis? So now we're sitting in a society where we're all, fuck the taxis. I'm like, yes, but also if we now really want to go in at an advanced society and look at how they are looking after their public transport and how we are looking after it, there is some sort of compromise, I believe, that both parties can accomplish.
So at the moment, the compromise is that everyone loses.
Yeah.
And you're right. We need to fix the traffic flow. And yes, Cape Town has an incredibly complex problem because our access to roads and the amount of cars on the road. If you just look at cars as a fluid, the volume of fluid exceeds the channeling for that fluid. That's pretty much what it boils down to. You're right. If we can streamline taxis so that they can flow, but you have to do it in such a way that it doesn't impede the natural car flow. So yellow line driving is completely okay until you get to the point where the taxi wants to be in that lane. You can't just have, on the N1 coming towards the M5 turnoff, taxis sometimes come in convoys of 20 or 30 taxis long in the yellow lane. And then by the time they get to the front, they want to go to Cape Town. So they cross 3 lanes of traffic. And they stop the traffic there for however long it takes for 30 taxis to get past into the fast lane. That is not acceptable. It's not an acceptable solution. It shouldn't be acceptable to anybody. Yes, I understand that taxis have people that they need to take to work. All in favor of that. But yes, there needs to be a designated way in which that happens. Even if it's as simple as a robot system. Okay, where you stop and everyone gets a chance. It's not, in my opinion, going to work for that sense. What would work is there's yellow lanes on both sides.
Sorry, I have one or two maybe international listeners. Robots in South Africa is traffic lights.
Yeah, so I had that experience in Taiwan as well, where everyone is looking at me.
You have robots at intersections? What are they doing there?
I've actually, I thought about this lots of times, but I've never really gone and found out where this comes from. Why do we speak about robots? But
maybe because it looks like one. The
Yeah,
old
the
school
little-
robots, it's independent. It operates on its own. I don't know. It's the same with I think circles and roundabouts.
Yes.
Just walk to the circle. What fucking circle? No, the roundabout. Anyway, let's not get too sidetracked there. I agree, but it's I just feel like I'm a big mixed martial arts fan, and they always say that when it comes to and it's all competition, you will get provided a set of rules, and I think all sports, if you take main sports like let's say rugby and football or soccer, I would say those are in South Africa the two main sports. Maybe cricket as well, but rugby and football, I think each year there is updates to the rule set. And each year the players figure new ways out how to bend the rules to their advantage. And I feel like new traffic lights, it will help for a certain period of time and then somehow they will figure. And it's almost like the way that bad habits evolve or progress, we need to have a governing system that tries to grow parallel to that and understand that yes, we're going to put a traffic light in, it's going to have a certain influence, but then we also need to be aware that there's going to be a negative influence. People want to have one-off quick solutions. I'm going to do this and then I never have to go back. I'm going to plant a tree in my garden, I never have to water it again. Like I don't know if that makes sense or if you understand that. But
it does. The problem with that is one of scale. Evolution is proportional to the population that supports it. And you have competing populations here. You have general population and government. General population is evolving in the methods in which they do things, like finding ways around rules. Government is a much smaller organism. You cannot expect them to evolve at the same rate. It is not possible.
is that why there's such a big disconnect between government and society? Because
Partly.
it just gets bigger every year.
Yeah, and government doesn't. So mostly government, the only way government can keep track is if there is very good communication, constant communication between the people that's being governed and government.
So, yeah.
The other part is that in South Africa and in many places, government has gone from providing lubrication for society, which is what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to put systems in place that make society work better. What it's devolved into is we're a group, we have got rules, we're going to apply those rules, and then we're going to see if we're better than the other group applying rules. It's my idea, so it becomes a competition between ideas and not striving for actually making things better. The drive to stay in power outweighs the drive of making society run better. And sometimes, and this is the problem, society runs better when you take away liberties from certain groups. When the people pushing it in front is no longer allowed to do that, the whole traffic flow increases. So society as a whole, I mean, it's a very oversimplified example, and I'm sure that people will come up with counterexamples to that. But in this case, the traffic flow improves when everyone has to make the same decision and work according to the same rules. When you get people who are allowed to go outside those rules, they benefit because they're no longer constrained by the rules. But the whole group, the metric measuring the group's progression, decreases. Government has to be concerned with the metric of the whole group. And in South Africa, that is not the case. there are so many groups vying for a little piece of the pie. And somebody has convinced them that all the other little groups are trying to get their piece of the pie. While the people that have the largest part of the pie never gives up anything. There is, again, this gets into very political territory, but you have women's rights, you have gender rights, you have crime, the problem of crime in South Africa. All of those seem to be fractured groups competing against each other, all going, my problem is the worst, therefore we have to take a look at it first. The only person that wins in that scenario is the status quo. Because your efforts are split. Instead of driving the real issues, which is violence against people, inequality against people, you now have different groups fighting each other. And nothing really changes.
But I had a conversation with someone the other day, which again, like you, I work on the basis that they're a lot more intelligent than me, and so it becomes quite nice to talk to them. But there was a discussion about genetically we are programmed not to work together. As a survival, it's almost like I'm watching my cats. Like, they grew up their first year of their life in an apartment. They were never outside unless they were on a balcony. But now they're literally in nature, and they're chasing squirrels, and they're climbing trees, and they're doing a lot of stuff that they never did. And they're very good at it. There's certain genetics within them. And it's almost like genetically humans aren't really designed to work together. And even if they work, and the World Cup rugby is a great example for me, where we all have the perception that we are the same and that we are working together. Because for 24 hours, all the racism and the fucking bullshit disappeared. And suddenly the rich, awkward old lady was talking to the cashier at Spar and saying how great a day it is. And everyone's fucking fake happy for 24 hours, and then we just go back to competing against each other. It's not a black or white or a middle class. Even within my family, my mom, my dad, my brothers, like, it's sometimes so difficult to work together. If I look at certain animals, species, listen, you've got your matriarch elephant, she's walking that way, we fucking going. We're moving in the same direction. And I don't know if that's also, if you have an opinion on that, but are we genetically not designed to work together as a safety security mechanism for survival?
The thing is, talking about genetics controlling that, I think is quite a stretch. Genetics form our basic body structure. But then from there's another layer. There's our intellectual layer. And our brains, although the structure comes from, or the basic structure comes from DNA, the actual structure is formed by our life experiences. Random processes when we are dividing as a little cell, as a fetus growing up, active processes as we grow and learn. So it's not that simple, and just linking genetics with outcomes, I think there is an enormous amount of chaotic processes between those two. So you can't tell me that this genetic code lends to a person being selfish. That I do not believe that mathematical mapping can be done. But we've actually spoken about this a little while back when we talked about the word experiment, the two American universities. The things that are familiar to us are seen as safer. And maybe I should touch on racism here, because it's a very unpopular opinion that I have, but everyone is racist. And in a certain sense, it is okay.
I call it cultural intolerance.
It's
a softer word.
It's seeing things that are the same. And that creates a bias in everyone. You have stronger feelings for your family, positive or negative, but you have stronger feelings, you want to protect them. That is as ingrained and natural as you can possibly get. And yes, that you can track back to protecting your genetics to a certain extent. But it's also a matter of limited resources, and you want to provide for your family first. It creates a bias. Saying that you don't have that bias is like saying, I don't have a problem. You never get to address it, you never watch out for it, it doesn't make it into your thought process. There is nothing wrong with having a bias for a reason. Once you've identified it, you don't have to listen to it. It doesn't have to move your decisions. And that's important. And as a scientist, it's one of the most important things that you have to do as a scientist, is when you are setting up something, you have a theory about it. To recognize that having a theory that is yours means that you have a bias towards that being true. And you have a responsibility to make sure that that bias does not make it into your scientific process.
Is that difficult?
It's very difficult. Looking at data, it's very easy to look at the data and go, well, this thing that says that I'm wrong, it's only 1 point. So maybe like the wind was blowing in the lab and it influenced the experimental results, and we're going to ignore that point. That's bad science. Okay? If you can verify that that point was influenced by the wind blowing, if you can verify that there's a reason why it doesn't agree, then fine. But just ignoring it because it doesn't suit your means, and that becomes easier the more you are invested in a positive or negative outcome. This links up with education as well. The more invested you are for all your students passing, the more biased you are going to be in testing them. If my salary is directly proportional to my pass rate, okay, I'm going to do everything in my power to make all the students pass, even those that should not be passing. And I know that I'm going to get a lot of flack from educators on this. No, everyone does not have to pass. Everyone does not generally pick up the proficiency that you need to pass a subject in that year.
Because then you work on the assumption that we're all equal intellectually.
And that is not true. Okay?
And sometimes it's not that we're not intellectually equal. You are living in more difficult situation than what I am, which makes it harder for you to study, focus. Maybe even your nutrition is contributing to a lack of...
Or you have sleep apnea, and it influences your ability to memorize things. It's completely true that your performance is influenced by your environment. Okay? And everyone's environment is not the same. But when you say that somebody passed a course, you are not talking about their performance relative to their means. You are saying this student understands this work to this level. End of story. You are not, as a teacher, working for students. You are not working for the education department. You are not working for the parents. You are working for society as a whole, because you are certifying that the students coming through have attained this level of proficiency. At school, it's important. At university, it becomes vital. When you get a degree, the university certifies that the person holding this degree has the ability to rationally analyze and reason to this specific level. If you have a cordon of people coming in, have them write a final exam, say, I need 80% of them to pass, so we're going to adjust the marks because bell curve. You are neglecting your responsibility.
So just quickly before you continue, explain the bell curve.
So the idea of the bell curve is that if you do a random experiment, okay, the distribution of your values around a mean, if it's random, is going to be shaped like a bell curve. So there's going to be a high probability
like
of getting something.
The clock in a tower bell.
Yeah. So on the mean, on the average, on what we think is the true value, there will be a high distribution, okay? And then it will drop down in kind of a bell curve, so that you have very low probability to get results that are far away from the average.
So is that very idealistic?
It's true in ideal conditions, okay? And the idea is that if you have a real-world process, a lot of times it's assumed that the distribution will be followed in principle. So you won't have a perfect bell curve, but you will have something approximating a bell curve. Education, for instance, is very much not a bell curve thing. A bell curve comes about when you have a random experiment. Okay? Writing an exam is probably the furthest you can get from something that's random. I've been preparing for something. I know most of the time what I'm going to get, the questions. It's not random. If you understand things, you should be consistently doing well. If you don't understand it, you should consistently not be doing well. And when you don't adjust things, that's exactly what you find. You find classes that have this double peak. You have students that are peaked around high value, 70, 75, 80%. And then you have another peak around the 40s, 50s. But
is that a reflection on the educational system, the teacher, or is that just real life depiction of...
It's politics. As a politician, I want something that I can show people. I need
but if you see this two things, there's two peaks, is that just reality? Is that where we are normally? We don't operate on a bell curve generally.
Let's say I go to random people in a certain place, okay, and I ask them a question specific to physics, something a third-year physics student should know. What's going to happen? Let's say I ask them 10 questions like that.
Yeah.
Okay? People that have no physics background might get one of two of those right. Okay? General things that they can figure out. Most of them won't. And then you'll get some students, some people, that get virtually all of them correct. Because it's something that's within. What's that graph going to look like? It's not going to be centered around the middle. The idea of that bell curve doesn't make sense.
So who introduced that to our educational system?
I do not know, actually. I know that it's been around since I was at school. And it's been used. So the distribution of marks, then you move the average, to the average that you expect, and then you adjust the marks accordingly. But
And
yeah,
yeah, I'm so glad that you say that it's a detriment to society because, but again, I'm sorry if people listen to me regularly and they hear this, but again, lack of eloquence, it's just such a dumb system because if we have a doctor that has a accreditation that is meaningless and he or she does something that kills you, we want to protest and everything. But it is a systemic problem that started at, let's say, primary school, and then high school, and then university, and then I don't know, like the way I see it is we always want to look at this, and this is what happened, and that's why I like air crash investigation. Because it's like, let's look at everything dating back to as far as possible we can to determine this. And there's never a singular answer. It's always a contribution of a variety of things. And I feel like it's similar in the educational system. So we want to complain about the taxi that is doing this. But we don't want to talk about, well, I've never been involved as a civil servant in any form, or I don't go to any civil society, I don't write a letter to the police, I don't pressurize the mayor doesn't, it's such a singular outlook.
The responsibility of being in a democracy versus the luxury of being in a democracy. You're absolutely right, and we don't take that seriously. We like to go out and do the big things. We go out and we protest. And then we write on social media about the unfairness with which the protest was handled. We post things on social media because it's easy, because we found it somewhere else and we can just go forward, post. Nobody goes and writes a letter to Parliament. Nobody goes and sits in front of Parliament and protests there. Okay, there are a few people, but they're pittance. We don't do that anymore. We don't have organized civil disobedience. We don't go, look, until you fix this pothole in my road, none of us are going to pay our taxes to the municipality.
The internet at the moment for me is the perfect example. Like I don't know if it's true, but the cable is broken between.
Yeah, so there's the two cables. Both the cables on the Atlantic side have got issues. So everything is running through the Durban cable.
So what's fascinating for me is, like, I look at my father. He's a very intelligent guy, very capable, and I admire him. But there's certain ways that he thinks. And my argument is, why do people in South Africa willingly accept that they are the ones that should cover the expenses of the company's problems? So let's say this cable is broken. That cable belongs to someone. Someone is paying money so that they can have access to that cable, and then they're selling that to us as the consumer. Now they have a problem with their infrastructure, but we are still paying full price for the service that we're getting, which is less than adequate and at 50% capacity. And when I said that, well, maybe you shouldn't tell them you're not going to pay the full price this month. You're going to just maybe pay 70% because you're getting 70% of what they promised you. It's like, I can't do that. It doesn't work like that. I'm like, but if everyone has that, then the companies will forever take advantage of you guys because you allow them to take advantage. This is the defeatist. And I wonder, where is the link between people not being so intelligent and people not knowing their capability? And does that relate back to your original statement of people not being taught to think for themselves?
I think there's at least a little bit of that in there, that people are willing to accept the status quo above everything else. Because, so one of the things Veritasium talks about is that we are lazy to think. We want to do the thing that's comfortable, and not thinking, just reacting is comfortable. And it makes sense from an evolutionary point of view because that uses less energy for your brain. If you use less energy, you need less resources. It gives you a higher chance of survival. It's perfectly reasonable. But we're not in an environment where we don't have enough food anymore. We are in an environment where we can use our brains, and yet we're still stuck there. We just don't use it. We stay in, it talks about system 1 and system 2. System 1 being the autopilot, the muscle memory part of your brain that just reacts the way that you've been taught to react, because that's the hardwired part of it. The system 2, the part where you actually have to engage, which is, by the way, not a very smart part of your brain. It's got limited memory. It's hard to do. You have to write things down because it doesn't all fit in your memory. But once you do that, engage a couple of times, it gets stored as a procedure in long-term memory. And then when that comes up again, you can do it easily. But you have to actively engage. Our environment is changing to the point where staying in system 1 is no longer viable, because the things you learned 3 years ago is not necessarily true now. You can't use that information. You have to verify, you have to check, you have to analyze. And that requires conscious effort.
But is that again easily?
That is not taught at schools.
And so where's the line between taught behavior and just the basic biology and human setup to think for yourself? Is thinking for yourself a taught behavior, or is there also an element of, are you, I don't know, are you born with intelligence? Is intelligence developed?
Intelligence is a very difficult concept because we know that we are intelligent because we have the ability to figure things out. Okay? We have the ability to look at things happening and project the future from that. We have that ability. A lot of people have measures for intelligence, IQ being one of them. Those are generally too one-dimensional. It tests 1 or 2 parameters, and it claims that those are the most important, and therefore people who score well in them are smarter than others. All of us, though, have the ability to learn, to rearrange, with various levels of difficulty. For some people, it's an easy process. For some people, it's a difficult process, but we can all do it. The one thing that I think becomes evident, and maybe that's the physics background speaking, is that when you're a kid, you talk about, the smartest person and the second smartest person. You try and rank people, or things, or dinosaurs, or cars. It's a natural thing to do.
Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yes. Stegosaurus is better. But when you get into physics, and you get deeply into physics, you see that there are so many people that have contributed immensely. And it doesn't really correlate with their intelligence. For some people, it's just putting in the effort over many, many years and doing immense amounts of work. So when I talk about intelligence there, I talk about what we normally see as intelligence. Mathematical ability, natural ability, and what you can accomplish if you put in the effort is not necessarily correlated.
And I think this is a topic that came up for me this last 2 weeks, is the problem with handing out awards. It's the link again, it's the way that we as humans interpret life from a psychological point? Because I wanted to ask you earlier, I assume that all scientists wants to be the one that unearths the truth. And you don't want to be the one that contributed 50 years so that the next person can achieve that.
I think
you want to be the one standing on the podium with the award.
I'm not saying that there are no scientists that want to be that person, but I think once you start working in the scientific field, you're going to find that the contributions you make, the constant contributions, far outweigh the one immense thing that you can accomplish. Because it's, to get anywhere, it needs to be collaborative. I'm not saying that there isn't some savant out there that does it all on his own. But that's generally not how things work anymore. You read articles, you get base knowledge from other scientists, and then you build on that. You cannot say that all of that is yours. You did new work, you produced new results, that's awesome. But all of that was built on hundreds of years of work. If you used calculus in your work, calculus comes from Newton and before Newton. You are indebted to the knowledge that those people generated, and therefore you're part of something much, much larger.
But you're not sharing your Nobel Prize money with all the contributors.
Again, when you're young, the Nobel Prize is, wow, look at what this person accomplished.
Yeah, it's like the Oscars of science.
But like the Oscars, you realize that the Oscar movie is not necessarily the best movie.
Yeah. Is there a lot of politics involved with the Nobel Prizes?
I don't know. It would be my assumption that there is. But exactly how much, I don't know. I've never really looked into it.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to talk to someone that has been involved in that sphere and that they don't care what other people think of them anymore.
There's, I can point you to somebody who might be able to give you some insight in it.
Okay. Give me the number afterwards.
Okay.
I'll hook them up with... because the idea that I have is I live a different life now than what I did 5 years ago. And the catalyst for my new life was my brother's death. There was a distinct way I was living pre and post. And something that I've come to realize in later life is the physical capabilities that I possess, which is on a higher level than the average person. And if I committed myself to almost any sport, I would have done fairly well to maybe amazingly well in it. And at 35, coming to realize that I've almost missed my opportunity to do that. Like I could still, if I really wanted to, maybe choose a sport and become amazing at it. But at 35, I've basically missed it. And then I listened to a lot of world champions talk about variety of stuff. And a common thread there is you have world champions that became world champions because they had fucked up parents and it was a way for them to channel a lot of things. Or you have world champions that have had amazing parents. And that is one of the accomplishments that they've had, is that they are a world champion and that they can appreciate being a world champion and they don't need the world championship to feel whole. And then I was thinking, well, what if that is my big accomplishment in life, is to be a father that is nurturing another human being to be successful? Isn't that the biggest accomplishment, and not necessarily being the world champion yourself? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's a little bit how
it's very much in line with what we were talking about. So you don't have to be the one that gets the accolade. You know what you've done. You know where you were involved and what you were doing. doesn't have to sit on your mantelpiece. If you contributed to that, you're part of it. But it's the same thing with society. We are very passive in society. We like to complain. That's, I think, one of the few defining properties of humanity is that.
And I'm one of those. Like, if you spend a lot of time with me, I'll give you a lot of opinions that's fucking worthless, and that's just based on my feeling right now.
Yeah. But seldom does that actually move into, okay, how do you solve this problem? And so one of the things that we're doing at school to try and curb that kind of behavior, the school is very open to students' feedback. Okay, if there's something in the school that is not how you think it should be, bring it to us. But you cannot complain about something nebulous. It has to be a specific thing. You can't tell me, I don't like the classrooms. What do you not like? Do you not like the space? Do you not like the lighting? Do you not like the position of the windows? Be specific. Okay? And secondly, how do you think it should be changed? Do not come to me with a problem that you have not spent at least a little bit of time thinking about. It doesn't have to be an amazing solution. It could be something that we think about and can show that it wouldn't work, but at least you've done the work. Okay? It's not something that costs you nothing.
Because I had a student ask me the other day, do you give discounts if I refer someone to you? So I said to her, what do you think would be a good discount? Based on I don't want to tell her, no, I don't do it. And I say, yes, I do it, because I'm not sure if it's like, I don't do it. But I'm quite flexible. So she's like, no, I'm just asking. I'm like, no, well, what do you think would be a good discount to give if don't worry. And I was like, as soon as I turned it to like, well, give me your input, she basically shut down. It was like the moment's too big. And it's a weird thing. I've had bosses that say, what would you like me to do about it? Almost this defeatist, like, well, what do you want me to do about it? Versus, what if they just said, what do you suggest we do? But so is that something that's now being cultivated at your specific school or at many different schools?
I can't talk about other schools, but at our school, that's something that we're definitely trying to implement. We're trying to give the students a sense of society, a sense of ownership. So every group has a class that's designated to them. Every group has a patch of land that they can create something on. So the grade 11s are doing a vegetable garden, and they're doing an amazing job there. They also have a classroom. So if the classroom it's very, very nicely designed. So it's a large, high-ceiling block with a landing at the back. So stairs up, landing, enclosed. So students can sit up there and be separate from the class being taught at the bottom, but they can sit up there and listen, or they can sit up there and work. The classrooms have all got a little kitchen in there, so the students can make themselves food, but they have to provide. We're not providing food, we're not providing cleaning supplies, we're not providing chairs and sofas and stuff for the top. So they have land, they can make money, they can invest and create a better classroom. They can put money away and buy stuff for the tuck shop and sell that to make more money. So there's a development of entrepreneurship as well, but there's also the expectation of developing the things that you were given. So you can't you have a classroom, you have to keep it neat, but you also have to develop it, make it better. With that, okay, we'll get to that just now. So students all have responsibility actively. We used to have a system where we have a class representative that's supposed to organize all of these things. What ended up happening is that one person does everything and nobody else does anything. So we've moved away from that completely. We now split the class into 3 committees. One committee is responsible for fundraising, one committee is responsible for the environment that they're in, and one committee is responsible for doing the academics. So they have to keep track of everything that's happening to that grade academically. There's a board that they write up all the assignments, when it has to be in, what has to be done. So the committee doesn't have to do all the work, but they're the ones responsible. Mm-hmm. So if I give an assignment in computer science and it's due for Friday, I go into their class and it's not on the board, I go and speak to the committee chairman for academics. Within that, each one of those is responsible for a certain set of subjects. So he will go down the line, speak to them, go, why is this not up yet?
Yeah.
But it would be a student from the group who has to come and inform them. Because all the committee, there's only 4 of them. There's not going to be one in each of the 11 different subjects. So it's a practical thing. But it also means that everyone gets used to the idea that they have something to contribute. And that there's an expectation, not just from the teachers, but from the students themselves, that their society works because you contribute to it. We want them to get used to that. We want them to go out and introduce that to the environment around them, to their parents, to their friends outside of school, hoping that it becomes more widespread. The other thing, and this kind of links up with that, but also links up with the mindfulness that you were talking about. The grade 8s and 9s, they're kind of separate from the grade 10s, 11s, and 12s. And we have a little more control over the 10s, 11s, and 12s write external exams. The 8s and 9s write the internal ones. So we have more control over what we examine. And what we're doing, part of what we're doing is that they have to write 3 journal entries. So there's a journal that's shared, the teachers have access to it. They need to put the following entries in every single day. They have to put in one thing that they did well that day. So an example, a specific example of something that they did well. So that when they look back, they can see that there were things that they did well every single day, consistently. Days are not bad days or good days, they are mixed days. Yes, sometimes more bad than good, but there's always something good that you can pick out of it. Then, one thing that you did poorly that day. So, be honest with yourself that you are not always going to be perfectly good at something. We all make mistakes. And then the last thing that I have to put in is one thing that you did better than previously. So that links up to the things that you did badly. So let's say that you recognize that in mathematics you were doing number relationships. And you were unsure about how negative numbers relate to positive numbers as far as being bigger or smaller than. So that would be an entry in, I did not understand this well. Or in the school setup, I did not prepare well enough before class when we were doing this. The next entry would be, whenever you have the class again, would be, I prepared better, I learned this, therefore it was better than on Wednesday.
Is this a daily exercise or
it's a daily exercise?
For each class?
For each class, every student has to write in their journal one thing that they did badly, one thing they did well, and one thing that they improved on.
But can you imagine that we as adults did the same?
So I mean, I think that everyone should be doing that.
Oh, can you imagine how, if I had to implement that, let's say I take my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my business, with my podcast, with other hobbies that I do. If I did the exact same thing, can you imagine
it doesn't have to be, and this is one of the things, we automatically think that progress happens in giant leaps. Mostly it doesn't. Mostly it's because today is just slightly better than yesterday. But if you put enough slighties together, things after a year is better than they were last year.
It's that whole thing of if a ship changes half a degree after a year, it will be on a completely different side of the earth.
Yep. Because it makes a huge difference. So we're trying to instill that idea with mixed success at this point, but it's early. So we're
What do you mean early? A year, 2, 3, 4,
We've
5?
only been doing it since the beginning of the year. So
couple of weeks.
A couple of weeks. It's not. Some of the students have already realized what a difference it can make. Some of the students are still seeing it as a chore that we're expecting from them.
Yeah.
And that's really, we have this discussion with the staff often. Every single thing that you force a student to do is something that they are not taking responsibility for. It means that you have to constantly put in the effort to get them to do that. What happens when you're not there?
Because we're gonna slowly wrap up because I see we just reached 90 minutes.
Okay,
so
that was a very quick 90 minutes.
And I still have. I'm hereby officially inviting you to come back because we're not going to be able to cover all the topics that I've wanted to do. Because the sleep apnea, we're going to leave it for next time. Okay. I wanted to ask you also of developments over this last couple of centuries that you've liked, findings. I wanted to touch base on that, certain universities that you like, the work that they do, and a few different things about teaching. I want to finish on the topic of what we spoke about and this life-changing thing that you told me about. It's not the responsibility of the teacher for the student to be successful, which I think ties in with the discussion that we have. And can you just explain that a little bit? And also, what we spoke about, I don't know if it was before the podcast started, but if you basically not thinking for your students and what effect that has on them.
It ties a little bit into what we just spoke, that if the responsibility is from me, if the energy for the thing happening comes from me, it means that once I am taken out of the environment, and teachers will be taken out of the environment for every student, they go away. That's the nature of student-teacher relationships. The moment you get taken out of that, what's going to happen? If the student is not the one driving it, if the student doesn't have the understanding that they have the control over how well they do, how well they understand, how well they learn, if they don't understand that, then everything that you're pushing them to do, everything that you are exciting them to do, everything that you are making them look forward to doing is for naught. Because the moment you're gone, who's going to excite them about the mathematics? Who's going to whip them into a frenzy about the physics?
But you're not saying to be boring.
No, and this is the thing, that once a student...
It's not like monotonely presenting all the information. It's just there's a slight switch mentally.
The switch is this. A student that comes into class prepared, so they know that they have the ability to absorb the work independently. They come to class having understood something from their effort. Then you have a discussion. I'm not going to teach them. I'm going to discuss things with them. They are going to try and teach me something. I understand the concept, therefore I can evaluate what they understand, how they understand. So I see their pattern of understanding, I can see where the reasoning errors happen, and we can fix that. And the thing about the reasoning errors is that they're universal. So the reasoning errors in the first time they come, I don't expect to see those happen as often later on because they've learned what they did wrong. They don't have to make that mistake again. So the next time they prepare something, it becomes easier to prepare because they know where the pitfalls are. If you do that iteratively for many subjects, you get a student that is capable of looking at a piece of information, absorbing the content in there, evaluating what is important, what is true, what is not important, and what is blatantly false, and presenting you with his reasons for doing so.
But what's the average age of your students?
The grade 8s and 9s are 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 for 10, 11, 12.
So you're teaching 14 to 18-year-olds?
Yes.
And they should be competent with this. And I'm thinking of, but that's not the approach that was taught to us when we were at school.
I'm not asking them to be competent in it. I'm asking them to start.
And how many learners per class?
So it varies, but it's small classes. I have, in the grade 8s and 9s, it's 14 students in each class. The grade 10s are 3 and 4 in physics and computer science. The grade 11s, a little larger, there's 7 in physics and 3 in computer science. And the grade 12s, there's only 2 in computer science and 3 in physics.
So is it expensive to be in this school?
It's not it's not as cheap as a
but let's say you compare to Paul Roos Gymnasium, Ronnebosch, Sachs, Weinberg.
Yeah, it's definitely less than Weinberg. It's less than Sachs.
Because can you replicate this approach that you guys have in a facility that caters for 40 learners in a classroom? Because it just seems that there's a lot of attention to detail.
You can, but the approach requires you to split things a little bit. So you were talking about what universities do I think are doing good things. Eric Mazier is a lecturer at Harvard University. He started by, he got put in charge of teaching physics to the first year medical students. And he decided to treat it as an experiment. So he gave them a concept-based test. So not testing preset questions like we normally do. We have a question bank, and after a while all the students know the questions in the question bank anyway. He tested whether they understood concepts. So not memorization, understanding. Gave them the test in the beginning, then taught them for a year, then gave them the same concept-based test. After the first year, what he found is that his students actually dropped in their understanding from before to after the. And he says that, as a teacher, that should be greatly worrying and humbling. Because your students are doing worse now. They understand physics worse than they did before you taught them.
Entered into their life.
So, but that he was teaching the standard way in which we teach. So we take information, we break it down into its smallest little Lego blocks, and then we put all the Lego blocks on the board for the students. We tell them what the name is and what it does, and then we start showing them how you combine the Lego blocks. That's the normal way of teaching. So we eat the food, we digest the food, we regurgitate the food, and we give it to you one spoon at a time. And that ends up with students that have less understanding than they came in with. That's what the science is. Department of Education have the opposite. So they want teachers to break things down even smaller. Give students even smaller amounts at a time. Not to overwhelm them. Okay? If they see that there's a concept that they don't understand, you support that student to the nth degree, including filling out more forms than is really necessary and than anybody would ever read. But that's another story. That student is supported by the energy of the teacher throughout that whole process. They never learn to apply their own energy. They never learn to apply their own power to understanding. And that student goes to university, and university is incredibly hard because university requires you to independently think and process. So what has happened? More and more students come in that are not ready for university. University pass rates drop. Government requires certain pass rates in order for universities to be funded. What's going to happen?
They adjust the bell curve. So they run the educational institution as a business and not as an educational institution.
But things run as businesses everywhere.
But that's just crazy. But let's not go there because that's a topic for another day. But again, it comes to the fact that I think what happened with our conversation 2 months ago is that as a teacher myself, I'm comfortable teaching people about life, because when I teach people about life, it's a pretty much trial and error approach. Listen, you're going to make mistakes and it's going to be fine. You're going to come back. We're going to talk about it and we're going to improve. And I'm very comfortable with, I detach myself from whatever is going to happen because the responsibility lies on the student. But then when it comes to my own business and being the teacher, I think because my method was wrong, I was struggling with being a teacher because everything was connected with achieving success. And I thought that I get learners that they are struggling because their life has not set them up for the real world.
Yep.
And then I think, well, I've got to be a bigger clown almost and jester to like get their attention. And I pitch all the things in such a way where I'm like, I'm gonna be like David Hasselhoff, and I'm gonna be protecting you all the way, and we're gonna walk. And it was destroying me spiritually because I was just exhausted because I'm like this Jesus figure, almost like suffering. And then after our discussion, it was like, it's like, it doesn't mean that I should stop caring. It's just like, leave it with them. And in physiotherapy, I had a shoulder injury, and they're like, okay, you have to pull a rubber band like this. And I got here, and then I couldn't do this last part. So what my wrist does is it does that.
Yeah.
And then this overcompensates. So they're like, don't do that. We want this muscle to get you all the way. And it's a little bit like that. It's like, don't stop, but just realize what you are doing is actually hindering the other people. And this last 2 months, it's been a completely different world with my business and with my students, the way that I interact. My tolerance, my patience has increased, my expectation of them. And then the results has been very good this last few months, where the certificate they achieved with me, that's always been there. But then that translating into employment, there's been a bigger conversion rate there. And I have you to thank for it, because I got very tired towards November last year. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? Because I care, but caring doesn't always mean it's good. It's the methodology almost of what you're implementing.
I mean, to me at the moment, baby is kind of in the front of my mind because I have a little toddler. Imagine if you never put your baby down to walk on their own or to crawl on their own. I mean, you are doing everything for them. Surely that's a good thing? But it's not. We know that it's not. But together with that, it actually fits in very nicely. Your baby is going to crawl, your baby is going to walk. Okay? The expectation that they have to walk by X weeks and, crawl by this time and walk by this time, that can be damning for a parent, because it's been 3 weeks and past the point and they're not walking yet. Okay? What am I doing wrong? It's not your job to teach them to walk. They will develop walking skills. Okay? Give them the opportunity to do it. Same with students. Give them as much opportunity to exercise their own skills. Guide them. But that's it. They have to figure out how to do it. Help them figure it out. But the effort has to come from them. And that's probably why the conversion rate is better. Because you have students that go to an interview now and actually have something to tell them. It's not just, I've done this course and we learned all of these things. It's, I have done these things. This is what works. This is what doesn't work. An employer looks at that and goes, well, that looks like a person that's actually done things, that have experience. I'm not going to have to hold their hand. Who are you going to employ between the two? So it helps. It helps the student. It helps the teacher. It is a better way of doing things.
Booyakasha. I think we're going to finish it on that.
Okay.
We've been talking 1 hour and 45 minutes. It's flown by. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was really nice chatting to you.
No, thank you so much. I would really love to have you back. There's a whole variety of questions that I didn't ask you.
And I'm sure that there will be comments.
I hope so. Listen, please guys, comment. Also, I'm trying to follow the Jaco Geldenhuys approach of not changing topics too quickly. Stick with the topic and let it go a little bit down that avenue and then change. But there's a million questions I wanted to ask you, so I'll have to get you back and we can talk about it.
Gladly come back. It was very nice.
Thank you. So we're gonna stop and then me and you're gonna continue talking.
Yeah.
about civilization as though it's a static state. There are no civilized people yet. It's a process that's constantly going on. We're not civilized. It's an ongoing process. And so we never become fully civilized because we have to know quite a bit in order to behave in the most constructive manner. And that goes for intelligence. that if people are fairly well informed in area A and B, not informed in area C. And so when you go on with a word like civilization, it sounds like something that was attained. As long as you have war, police, prisons, crime, you're in the early stages of civilization, what they call civilization.